SNCF wrong trains. On May 21, 2014, France faced one of its most absurd transport disasters. The national rail operator, SNCF, admitted it had ordered 2,000 new trains worth 15 billion euros, but the trains were too wide for more than 1,300 station platforms built before the 1980s. The mistake came from RFF, the rail infrastructure manager, which had given SNCF outdated platform measurements. Transport Secretary Frederic Cuvillier called the blunder regrettable. But newspapers mocked it as comedy. Fixing the stations cost another 50 million euros, requiring months of construction work across the country. Commuters watched gleaming trains roll in, squeezing against platforms being hacked apart by jackhammers. Politicians raged, taxpayers sighed, and the platforms kept shrinking one by one. Sydney Opera House. If you stood at Bennelong Point in 1959, you would have seen workers breaking ground on what was meant to be Sydney's greatest landmark. Danish architect Bjorn Utzon designed the opera house with giant white sails rising over the harbor. The plan was 7 million Australian dollars and 4 years of work. But the design was complex, the concrete shells hard to build, and politicians argued over costs. By 1966, the project was so over budget that Utzon resigned. When the opera house finally opened on October 20, 1973, the bill was 102 million Australian dollars, 14 times more. The building became famous, but people still joked about the money, the delays, and the endless scaffolding. Target Canada. On January 15, 2011, Target made its big move north, paying 1.8 billion Canadian dollars for 220 Zellers leases. By March 2013, the first stores opened, bright red signs glowing in Canadian malls. Shoppers rushed in, expecting bargains and shelves filled like they had seen in the US. Instead, they found half-empty aisles. Supply chains crumbled, prices were higher than Walmart, and word spread that Target wasn't Target at all. Losses hit 1 billion Canadian dollars in the first year. CEO Greg Steinhoffel promised things would turn around, but they didn't. On January 15, 2015, Target Canada shut down after losing 2.1 billion Canadian dollars. The stores closed, 17,000 jobs disappeared, and the red bullseye faded like it had never arrived. Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. If you drove past Schönefeld in 2006, you would have seen cranes and scaffolding rising. Berlin's long-promised airport had finally broken ground. The plan was clean. Open in October 2011, cost 2 billion euros. Politicians bragged about efficiency. Then came the fire alarms that didn't work. The escalators built too short, and the 90,000 cables laid the wrong way. Deadlines slipped. By 2013, CEO Rainer Schwartz was fired, but nothing improved. The airport sat finished, yet empty, guarded at €1 million a month, just to keep vandals out. It finally opened on October 31st, 2020, at a cost of 7 billion euros. Planes took off at last, but Berliners kept calling it a very expensive punchline. Nukegate. On July 31, 2017, executives at Scana and Sante Cooper admitted what the public feared. The VC Summer nuclear project was dead. 2 new reactors, promised back in 2008 for $9 billion, were years late and billions over budget. Contractor Westinghouse Electric, owned by Toshiba, had filed for bankruptcy in March 2017, leaving the project adrift. Yet customers were already paying higher utility bills to fund construction that was going nowhere. When the plug was pulled, workers walked off the site, leaving cooling towers half-finished against the Carolina sky. Politicians blamed each other, lawsuits piled up, and locals were told they'd keep paying. The concrete shells never made power, but they generated plenty of anger. Boeing 737 MAX grounding. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed into the Java Sea, killing 189 people. 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 went down near Addis Ababa. Another 157 lives lost. Both planes were Boeing's new 737 MAX, pushed through under CEO Dennis Muilenburg to beat Airbus's A320neo. The cause was traced to MCAs, software that forced the nose downward. Pilots weren't told it existed. Training manuals skipped it. On March 13, 2019, regulators grounded every 737 MAX worldwide, more than 400 planes. Boeing bled over $20 billion in losses. Muilenburg was ousted, but the jet returned 2 years later. Passengers boarded nervously, still wondering if fixed software was worth trusting. The Big Dig. On September 6, 1991, Boston broke ground on the Central Artery Tunnel project, better known as the Big Dig. The goal was to replace the city's crumbling elevated highway with underground tunnels. The cost was set at $2.8 billion. By the early 2000s, the budget had ballooned to $14.6 billion, making it the most expensive highway project in U.S. history. Delays, leaks, and design flaws plagued construction. In 2006, a ceiling panel collapsed inside the tunnel, killing a woman. Politicians like Governor Michael Dukakis defended the vision, but public trust eroded. Bostonians still drive through it, glancing up at the ceiling like they're waiting for the next crack. 3 Gorges Dam. On December 14, 1994, workers began building the Three Gorges Dam on China's Yangtze River. Backed by Premier Li Peng, the plan was to generate cheap power and control floods. The budget was 90 billion yuan, or about $12 billion, and completion was set for 2009. By the time the last turbine was installed in July 2012, costs had risen to more than 200 billion yuan. The dam displaced 1.3 million people, flooded archaeological sites, and altered ecosystems downstream. Officials boasted of producing 22,500 megawatts of electricity, the largest in the world. The dam still stands, but villagers joke they move for progress, while progress itself might one day wash away. Kodak's digital failure. In 1975, Kodak engineer Stephen Sasson built the first digital camera. It recorded grainy images onto a cassette tape, a device that looked more like a toaster than a camera. Sasson showed it to executives, who dismissed the idea. Digital, they feared, would destroy Kodak's golden film empire. CEO Colby Chandler, and later George Fisher, kept the company tied to film even as digital photography spread through the 1990s. By 2001, digital cameras outsold film worldwide. Kodak scrambled too late, losing more than $5 billion between 2008 and 2011 as sales collapsed. On January 19, 2012, Kodak filed for bankruptcy, wiping out $30 billion in market value. The company that invented digital was undone by it. Its name became a cautionary tale in every business textbook. Volkswagen Dieselgate. On September 18, 2015, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency accused Volkswagen of cheating on emissions tests. Regulators discovered Volkswagen had secretly installed defeat devices in 11 million diesel cars, making them pass lab tests while polluting up to 40 times the legal limit on the road. CEO Martin Winterkorn resigned 4 days later, denying personal knowledge. The scandal spread to Audi and Porsche, shaking Germany's proud auto industry. Volkswagen set aside more than 30 billion euros for fines, recalls, and lawsuits. Customers felt betrayed, investors fled, and Volkswagen's clean diesel slogan turned to ash. The cars kept running, but the air was dirtier, and the brand's reputation smelled like exhaust no filter could hide. Deepwater Horizon. On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, leased by British Petroleum, exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. 11 workers were killed. Over the next 87 days, more than 4.9 million barrels of oil gushed into the sea. CEO Tony Hayward tried to calm the outrage, but only made it worse, telling reporters he wanted his life back. BP's stock lost half its value in weeks, wiping out $90 billion. The company paid more than $65 billion in fines, settlements, and cleanup. Fishing towns were gutted, coastlines blackened, and the world watched oil spread on the water. The well was capped, but the slick became a stain no corporate rebrand could wash away. AOL Time Warner merger. On January 10, 2000, AOL CEO Steve Case and Time Warner's Gerald Levin announced the largest merger in U.S. history. The deal was worth $165 billion, hailed as the perfect marriage of old media and the rising internet. But AOL's dial-up empire collapsed as broadband took over. Time Warner's content clashed with AOL's culture. When the dot-com bubble burst, AOL's value evaporated almost overnight. By 2002, the combined company reported a staggering $99 billion loss, the largest annual loss in corporate history. Levin resigned, Case was pushed out, and Wall Street laughed at what had once been called a deal for the century. The merger survived on paper, but its reputation was never spoken of kindly again.